on Refreshing Judaism. I hope that many of you or all of you were able to join last week when Cantor Melissa Cohen discussed prayer and traditions of prayer and meanings of prayers. In a way, what we're going to be doing today picks up on that conversation. And if at any point there are issues or questions that you would like to review or revisit, just do so. Some operational information. We are now at session 5 of our Refreshing Judaism roster. And we are going to be talking about the ordinary and the holy. And in a way that will open the door for next week's conversation, which is on Jewish timetables, seasons, festivals, sacred times, Sabbath, etc., etc. As we move and the course progresses, I'd like to invite those of you who are taking this series because you are considering conversion to Judaism to just drop me a note to that effect so that I know who among you are interested in the preparation for conversion. We have some people from last year who took part of the course or most of the course and have not yet completed the process because of the unprecedented interventions of the pandemic. But we will be moving in that direction and hopefully with a new cadre of people completing a cycle as we move into the year 2021. But it would be helpful to me to know two things. If you took the course in the past with me and were interested in conversion, please let me know, because we had some conversations among some of us, and some were on hold and some were ready to move forward. So if you're still interested in conversion and you started with me last year in this study process, please let me know. Those of you who have just joined the course this year and are interested in conversion, please let me know. And understand that participation in this course is open regardless of whether or not you're interested in the conversion process. So what we will do at some point along the way, once I have the list of people who are interested in the process of conversion, is either schedule a time just to converse with you through Zoom, or have you stay for a while after one of the regular sessions. But it would help me to know who is interested in considering or exploring conversion to Judaism. And there is no commitment on your part, and you understand that the process is open. Okay, well, welcome to this morning's conversation. My first 3 sessions with you were trying to pack a tremendous amount of information and kind of giving you a conceptual chronology and understanding of the development of Jewish religion and culture. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about important concepts in Judaism, and I hope to make this a more conversational session. And feel free to somehow identify yourselves if you have any questions by raising your hand. I think I have you all on one screen. Yes, we just about fill up one screen. You can just identify yourselves. You can always pose a question in the chat, and if I don't pick it up, hopefully Jackie will pick it up and we will entertain it as we move along. I want to introduce 2 important concepts from the vocabulary of Judaism. One, which I am sure you have heard, and the other, which, at least in Hebrew, might be newer to you. The first concept that I want to introduce is the concept of mitzvah, or in modern Hebrew pronunciation, mitzvah. Mitzvah. I don't know how many of those Hebrew letters you have learned yet, but the Hebrew letters for mitzvah would be a mem, a tzadi, a vav, and a hey. Mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? I'm asking the question. I'll take a response. Unmute yourself if you want to respond.
Good deed.
Commandment.
Okay, Tony tells us that a mitzvah is a good deed. And in many ways, it is. Can you give me the word mitzvah in a common usage that we utilize in the common vocabulary of Judaism?
Bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah?
Okay, a bar or a bat mitzvah. Yes, Betsy, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say, in terms of following on the example, not so much a ceremony, but the mitzvah of comforting comforting mourners or visiting the sick, making peace where there's strife.
Right. Well, you're introducing now a broader understanding. Thank you. And from what Betsy and Tony have said, mitzvah can either be a ritual performance or it can be a doing of a kind deed, comforting mourners, providing aid. These are all mitzvot. So bar and bat mitzvah are the most common expressions. Perhaps you've heard the expression, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah, right? So what does it mean that something is a mitzvah? Nice alliteration there in the English and the Hebrew, right? It's a mitzvah. Okay. So what's a mitzvah? The word at its root comes from the Hebrew term that means commandment or obligation. So it refers to those things that we see ourselves duty bound or responsible for observance. So a mitzvah is something that is enjoined upon us as part of the tradition. And it can be a good deed if it's done in relationship to another person. And the tradition, in fact, distinguishes between two categories of mitzvot. Mitzvah, singular, mitzvot, plural. You know, the feminine plural in Hebrew is ot, generally. So mitzvah, mitzvot. There are mitzvot, what the tradition calls bein adam lamakom, between the human being and God. And those refer mostly to ritual obligations, religiously couched experiences. And then there is the other category of mitzvot, commandments, bein adam lechavero, between a human being and another human being. So we have mitzvot that connect us to the divine and mitzvot that connect us to the human community. And those are generally what we refer to as the good deeds, but they are of specific nature. So I think we studied during the second session when we looked at Rabbinic Judaism, a text where the rabbis tried to discern what was the most important mitzvah or the most important commandment in the Torah. And you'll remember that there was a disagreement between Hillel and Shammai. Well, not so much a disagreement, but Shammai had no patience for the question of the Roman who came to inquire about that. And Hillel said, this is the most important mitzvah. What is hurtful to you, do not do to another. That is the essence of the Torah. The rest is commentary. So here Hillel summarized the mitzvot of Judaism in terms of relationships. How do we relate to one another? Rabbi Akiva said that the most important mitzvah was a verse from the Torah itself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Ve'ahavta l'reecha kamocha. That is a commandment in the Torah, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not one of the 10 commandments, interestingly. It's in the book of Leviticus. It's one of the 10 commandments. Well, the rabbis evolve a whole body, a whole package of mitzvot, trying to derive from the Torah the teachings that constitute the obligations, the duties, the responsibilities of Jewish living. And in the rabbinic imagination, they come up with 613 mitzvot. What is the website or the email for Beth-El Tzedek? BEZ613.org. When we were looking for an email, when we for an identifier many years ago, they asked me, what should we use? And I said, let's use this. And so by looking at that, you are reminded of the life of mitzvah connected with the synagogue. Now, this number 613 is kind of an ideal number. No Jew today does or can perform the 613 mitzvot, because many of them are associated with living in the land of Israel. Many of them are associated with the obligations that existed in the ancient temple in Jerusalem, which is no longer standing. So 613 becomes kind of an allegorical, a mythological motif, but still it remains. What this tells us is what Hillel said: what is hurtful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the essence of the Torah, but there is a commentary to it. Go learn it, is what he said. So being a Jew, if you ever wanted to come up with a caption definition, would probably be living a life of mitzvah. To be a Jew is to somehow see oneself bound, responsible, committed to the concept of mitzvah. For some people, that is I introduced the term supernatural and non-supernatural. For some people, that is seen as a divinely mandated set of commandments. For others, it is an expression of being Jewish that emanates from the religious will and inclination of the people in our Jewish experience. So here's a simple definition, a difference between a supernatural understanding of religion and a non-supernatural understanding of religion. In the supernatural understanding, God gives the Torah and the mitzvot to Israel. God gives the Torah to Israel. In the non-supernaturalist understanding, Israel, meaning the people, in its quest for God, creates the Torah. So in one, the Torah itself is a supernatural body, ready-made. Here it is. In the other, it's the ongoing unfolding, discovery, experience of the Jewish people in its spiritual quest. And there are two different ways of looking at religion. And I think that this would apply not only to a Jewish view of tradition, but in many other religious traditions as well. The movement, the teachings that best exemplify the non-supernaturalist approach in Judaism is the Reconstructionist movement. But in many ways, many Reform and conservative rabbis also have that theological understanding. To be an Orthodox Jew, on the other hand, is essentially to believe that the Torah is a mandated and divinely revealed, supernaturally document and set of instructions that flow from it through appropriate interpretation. So there we have an understanding of two different views of religion. So mitzvah, an obligation, a responsibility, a commandment. You feel obligated to do it. It is part of tradition. For many people, we do mitzvahs because it's part of tradition. How many of you light Shabbat candles, or try at least to light Shabbat candles? Well, that's a mitzvah. That's a way to usher Shabbat. We embody it with us. So that is a ritual obligation, right? Not a moral. Makes you feel good. Nice time with the family, good time with the friends, but it's more in the realm of ritual rather than human relationships. So we talked about lighting the Shabbat candles. The performance of especially ritual mitzvahs in Judaism is often encapsulated in the recitation of a prayer formula. I'm sure you talked about this with Cantor Melissa last time, what we call a bracha or a bracha, which means an expression of blessing. Can somebody recite for me the classical opening words of a bracha? Betsy, let's see if you remember your Beth-El experience.
Yes,
Yes.
but I'm only going to say it, not sing it.
Yes.
Baruch atah Adonai,
Very good. A
Eloheinu
bracha.
melech haolam.
Good. Continue with the next phrase. Asher.
Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav.
Okay, stop there. Okay, that's how a bracha opens. Some brachot, plural of bracha, the word bracha means a blessing, so the plural is brachot, blessings. Some just say, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, our God, the God of the universe, the King of the universe, the sovereign of the universe. And then you stop there, and then you say something which is mostly an expression of gratitude. So give me a blessing that would flow from Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam.
Shehechianu v'kiyamanu
Very
v'higiyanu
good.
b'zman hazeh.
Okay, you went high. Sheheheyanu v'kimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. You have given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this moment. That is the bracha that we say at a time of joy, at a time of new beginnings, when you do something new or celebrate a meaningful occasion. Who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this moment. We don't take it for granted. We acknowledge it. Now give me a ritual blessing that begins just with those 6 words. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam. Yes? Betsy?
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
There you go. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And that means, many of you know, who brings bread forth from the earth. So when we begin a meal, especially when we eat a piece of bread, we say that blessing. Blessed are you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. So it's just a blessing of thanksgiving. We are acknowledging this moment and this blessing that comes to us, this bounty. In a way, a blessing is a bounty, this goodness that comes to us. We are acknowledging it. Another one, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen, creator of the fruit of the wine or of the vine, right? We're giving thanks for something. However, sometimes we add to those 6 words 3 more words. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. Kidshanu was the most ancient Jewish cowboy, Kidshanu. Ever heard of them? Okay, so Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav. Asher means who, the one that, kidshanu, has brought holiness into our lives, b'mitzvotav, through your mitzvot. So the mitzvot are seen as vessels of holiness, opportunities to experience the holy in our lives. And we say that not when we are recipients of something, but when we are going to do something that is a performance, an active engagement with a mitzvah. For example, we say hamotzi lechem because we receive the bread. But what do we say before we light the candles on Shabbat or a festival. Aha. So we say, blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us through your mitzvot, through the act of kindling the Sabbath lights, or through the act of doing this, or through the act of doing that. So those three words, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, are said in a blessing, in a bracha, when we have an active participation in the event. Without the three words, we are the recipients of the bread, of the wine, of the shehecheyanu, of the joys. But if we are doing something, performing a mitzvah, then we are saying that. And what is interesting here is that it introduces the second important term that I want to discuss with you this morning. We're talking about mitzvah, and then we say that the mitzvah, kidshanu, brings sanctity or holiness into our lives. So Judaism is the life of mitzvah, but the end goal of mitzvah is kedusha, holiness, sanctification. And that's a term that we're going to talk about for a while. The Hebrew term for holy is kadosh. If you've learned the letters in Hebrew, kuf, dalid, shin, that's the root. Kadosh has many different expressions, and it best it translates either as holy or sacred. How do we invite sacredness into our lives? Let me pause for a minute and even take a step back. Would somebody be willing to share with us, other than Tony and Betsy for a moment, an experience of holiness or an experience of sacredness, what you could identify as a holy moment, a holy experience, a holy time? Can anybody share that? When have you had an encounter, an awareness of the sacred or the holy? And what did that mean? Anything goes.
So for me, because I'm converting, it was the very first time that I lit Hanukkah candles.
Wonderful. Who is talking? I'm sorry, I didn't see.
It's Steph.
Hey, Steph.
Blanco.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And in what ways did you experience, that was the event, that was the action, and what was the experience? If you can capture it.
It was an overwhelming feeling of peace and joy at the same time, seeing in a darkened room, seeing it light up just with that first candle. And it was very tranquil and very peaceful.
Wonderful. Any other sharings of a moment or experience of the kadosh, or as we would say in Hebrew, kadosh is the noun, kedusha is also a noun, but it's the experience. So something is kadosh, or you bring kedusha, holiness, or sacredness, awareness of it to your life. Yes. Any other sharing? There is no right and wrong here. I'm just trying to kind of get to what it is that we mean when we talk about the sacred.
Mm-hmm. And this might come off as a little bit silly, but for me, what always brings my mind to this experience is if I'm in a place either at work or at home, and there's, like, say, a cockroach or some other insect around, and there's the cries of somebody kill it, and I'm always one to raise my hand to, like, gently usher it outside. And in that sort of moment of making myself reckon with, the when we come across as like the smallest, most insignificant of lives, and just being reminded to show compassion and empathy for things that we're not always called to, and being in sort of awe of the smallest bits of existence. That to me is where I often find myself coming as close as I can describe to an encounter with the divine.
Okay. So the awareness that even in that insect, there is something that is unique, distinct, that needs to be protected, and that there is a relationship that makes you sensitive to that. Good. Anything else?
Two very opposite extremes. The birth of your child, for those of us who've experienced that, it brings the beauty of life, the future, the next generation. And then the flip of that, the extreme, is the burial of your parent. You're at the gravesite. It's a very sad moment, but you reflect upon all the wonderful things that you were taught, and your obligation is the next generation moving forward.
Okay. So we have four very meaningful expressions of how the sacred might be experienced. What is the opposite of the word sacred or holy in English?
Mundane, maybe.
Mundane. Give me another one.
Profane.
Desecrated.
Profane. I'm sorry, somebody said desecrated. Yeah, desecrated, it literally means to make unsacred, right? To desecrate, to make unsacred. But is there a positive term? And you have already had mundane. What was the other one?
Profane.
Profane. Okay. What does the word profane come from? It comes from the Latin, means profanum, and it's an architectural term. It designated that part of the temple in ancient Rome, the Roman temples or whatever, that was before you entered the sacred place. So profane is the not holy. Mundane means, of course, the worldly, the everyday, right? So here we are capturing, if these are the opposite terms to sacred, that the term sacred or holy designates that which is different, other than the mundane experience, the profane experience, the ordinary experience. So sacred is to mundane or profane as extraordinary is to ordinary. Our lives are lived in the realm of the mundane, of the profane, of the ordinary. Another word is secular. People use the word secular and sacred. These are not bad terms. These are very good terms, and we live in them. We need to live in them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do the things that we need to do. We live in the world of the mundane, of the secular, of the ordinary. But there are certain moments that either happen to us that are extraordinary, or that we invite into our lives in order to make those moments extraordinary. And in doing so, religiously, we either ritualize those moments, we celebrate them. You know, Friday night can be just Friday night. But if you take notice of it in a certain way, if you decide to hopefully get together with family and friends, and if that is not possible, to set aside a moment to light candles, to raise a cup of wine, to sanctify the moment, then what you are doing is inviting into that moment an awareness of the sacred, an awareness of the holiness. You are transforming that moment, that ordinary moment, into a vessel of holiness. You can toast on a cup and drink your libation, or you can say, this libation at this moment, I'm going to say a blessing, and I'm going to asher kidshanu, bring into this moment an awareness of sanctity, an awareness of holiness that will put me in a different moment, in a different space, in a different time. If you ever want to read the most important, and it's not a long book, it's a short little book, and if you didn't read it in college, or if anybody did anthropology, you certainly did it. If you did religion or perhaps even sociology, you read the book. It's called The Idea of the Holy by Rudolf Otto, O-T-T-O. And it's a book that's at least 100 years old, but it is worth reading because it sets the tone for all studies about the holy and how it's experienced. And he refers to the holy as the mysterium tremendum, the great moment of mystery. And he says it is fascinans. It has a certain fascinating quality about it that you can't quite grasp, but it's there. Like Stephanie experienced that Hanukkah lighting ceremony as this is different. This has something special to it. Or when you stand at a parent's grave, or when you receive a child and you give a name to that child and you bring the child into the family. So all these are experiences of holiness, of sacredness. It is immanent, but it is transcendent. It takes you to a different place, spiritually, emotionally. Sometimes it is distant, but at the same time, it's there. And there's a certain ambivalence to the holy, according to Otto. It both attracts and sometimes kind of cautions you. That's awe, the experience of awe associated with sacred places, sacred times. Ever been in a place and the moment you walk in, you say, oh, or wow. That's an experience of the holy.
Rabbi, may I ask a question?
Sure.
What about people, special people who come to your life at certain point and you recognize something is really different with that person because people who are sent your way that they might not even have, you cannot even imagine meeting the person at a certain point of your life.
Yeah.
Do we
Absolutely.
consider or circumstances, some circumstances are coming to you and you're thinking, oh man, that's very, very different. And it will answer some of my questions right now, or some of my fears, or some of my stress, emotions,
Yes. We definitely all have had the experience of being in the presence of somebody who is kind of just different, extraordinary. And sometimes that is evoked as an experience of holiness. Interestingly, in the Jewish tradition, with some exceptions of the Hasidic tradition, where the Rebbe is referred to as the Holy One, there has been a tendency in Judaism not to try to impute sacredness or holiness to the person, but rather to see in the person a vessel of holiness.
correct. Yes.
And in fact, just to bring it down to the present experience, cantors, rabbis, people who facilitate the religious experience are called in the Jewish tradition klei kodesh. Clay means a vessel. Klei kodesh. Some people incorrectly translate holy vessels. We are not holy vessels. We are vessels of the holy, meaning we are purveyors or attempt to be purveyors of the experience and not. So there's a certain reluctance in the Jewish tradition. What is the first thing that is sanctified, made holy in the Torah, in the Bible? And we can say in the Jewish tradition. What is the first thing that is declared holy in the Torah?
The Sabbath?
Correct. Shabbat. When God creates the world in the first chapter of Genesis by speaking it into being, at the end of every day, it says, it is good. It is good. This thing is good. That thing is good. That thing is good. But only at the end of the seventh day, the declaration of the Shabbat is made holy, kadosh. So things are good, but certain experiences of time and of relationship and of experience, they're holy. And the holiness is something that inheres in the experience. Sometimes it's difficult to carry it with you, right? The moment is not always portable. So the purpose of the religious life is to live in the ordinary, but aspire to the extraordinary so that it can carry us through the ordinary. So that's a little bit about mitzvah and kedusha, the experience of the holy. Ritual is in many ways the way in which we try to embody the holy in the tradition, the ways in which we observe Shabbat, the ways in which we sanctify a wedding, the way in which we try to bring meaning to the funeral experience, the baby naming. Those are efforts to capture what is in many ways an unexpressible, in the words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, an ineffable experience. Ineffable, that's a good word for your SATs. Ineffable means something that cannot be effed, means spoken. It defies being effed, defies being spoken. It's the ineffable. In many ways, Martin Buber writes about this in terms of his philosophy of dialogue. Martin Buber talks about two different types of experience, of encounter. The I-it encounter and the I-thou encounter. I-it is the way that we relate to things that are usable for us, to transactional, even to people. People can have an I-it relationship. If you are my teacher and I am your student, we might like each other, but it's an I-it relationship. We are exchanging something. I-thou relationship, however, to Buber, is the encounter where there is no utilitarian intention or purpose, where two people meet in the fullness of who they are without seeking to derive any benefit from one another, simply affirming the other. And a marriage, ideally, or a relationship of love, ideally, is that, an I-thou relationship. But you can't live at that level all the time. Every I-thou relationship, every I-thou encounter must, by needs, because we live in the world of the mundane, reduce itself to I-it. So spouses who pledge love to one another live in the world of I-it, but you try to make moments of the I-thou. And according to Buber, God is the eternal thou, the reality that is always present to us that we cannot use, because trying to use God is not religion, it is magic. There you are, Kate. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that was your question, right? Okay,
Yes.
anything about that? Let me just teach you a few words that contain, or you're going to come up with them, and then I'm just going to open it for some reflection questioning. Let's think of some words in Hebrew that are rooted in the term kadosh, which means holy or sacred. The Hebrew letters are kuf, daled, shin, kadosh. What words do you know that come from that root? We already referred to one earlier. When we raise the cup of wine on Shabbat, what do we recite?
Kiddush.
The kiddush. The prayer over the wine is called a kiddush. We are not making the wine holy. The wine is not holy. It is a vessel to make us aware of the holiness of the Sabbath. The Shabbat is holy. The wine is the symbol of joy. So we are not blessing the wine. We are blessing the day. The same thing with the candles. We don't bless the candles. The light of the candles is a symbol for the sanctity of the day of light, the day of joy. Okay? Very good. So kiddush or kiddush in Hebrew. What else?
How about
The
Kaddish?
Kaddish.
The Kaddish, the prayer that we say as a mourner's prayer. Kaddish. The word Kaddish comes from the same root as kiddush, and it means to sanctify. What are we sanctifying? There's not one reference to the concept or the word for death in the Kaddish. It is an affirmation of faith, an affirmation of life, an affirmation of the divine, or a sanctification of the divine in the face of loss. At the moment when you feel most devastated, most destitute, most hurt, you affirm life in the words of the Kaddish. That is, you affirm your faith. That's the Kaddish. Another word that contains the root Kodesh. Kiddushin. Kiddushin is the Hebrew term for the marital ritual. Kiddushin, the ceremony of making holy. Now, what are you making holy there? Kiddushin. And here we're going to look at a little nuance of the word kadosh.
The union between two lives.
So what does that mean, that you're making that?
Marriage.
Yes.
In front of
holy.
It's one of the commandments to get together so we can reproduce.
Okay. Interestingly, one of the earliest observations that God makes in the Torah is, what is the first? Creation is good. What is the first thing that God calls not good?
For people to be alone.
That's it. It is not good for the human to be alone. I shall make a fitting partner. That's how the story of the creation goes, not in the first chapter, but in the second chapter of creation. So here, whether you understand this to mean two people, a man and a woman, two loving companions of whatever gender, companionship is the issue. The Torah declares lack of companionship to be not good. And that relationship is one of sacredness. When you in the wedding ceremony, at the moment that the rings are exchanged, these are the words that are spoken. Hare at, behold, you, mekudeshet or mekudash, are made holy unto me by this ring, according to the laws of Moses and the faith of Israel. That is the word. By this ring you are made holy unto me. What does that mean? You are made holy unto me. That is the crucial moment of the ceremony. You can say that in a room with two witnesses, and technically you are married, according to Jewish tradition. The pronouncement of those words and the exchange of a token in that relationship is a confirmation of the sacredness of the relationship. So here we come to a finer understanding of the word mekudash. To make holy means to set aside, to make distinct, to make other than mundane, to make extraordinary. So that exchange of that ring with the word mekudash li, you are made holy unto me, means by a token of this ring, you and I are set aside for one another from any other type of relationship that we might have with anybody else. It is the setting aside of the relationship and making it unique, distinct, unlike any other. And that's one of the meanings of making holy. Holy is to have an experience that's unlike your typical everyday relationship or experience. So we have kiddush, kaddish, kiddushin, the marriage or committal marriage ceremony. Then there's another mikdash. Anybody ever heard the term mikdash? The Beit HaMikdash, the house of holiness. It's a reference to the temple in Jerusalem. It is never used for the institution that succeeds the temple, the synagogue. The synagogue is not called a Beit HaMikdash, a house of holiness. You know what is called a Beit HaMikdash or a Mikdash Me'at, a small sanctuary? The home. The home. So the substitute for the temple is the home, and the table around which you gather to celebrate Shabbat and just to eat together, which is itself a sacred moment over which you say blessings, right? You say blessings before, you say blessings after, you sanctify the moment. The home is the mikdash, the sanctuary, and the table is the altar. And anywhere that people gather for purposes of that awareness and celebration, that is a place of holiness. There is no holiness inherent in buildings. Remember, Judaism is a religion that sanctifies time and relationships, not things and places, even though we have associations with historic moments and we see them. But what makes them holy is not the thingishness of them, but, and here I'm inventing a term right now, the trans-thingishness of them. What transcends the thingishness. Okay? That was not a pun, but I see it's evoked some laughter. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm talking a lot. I want your reflections, your responses, and then we are going to talk about ways in which we can bring mitzvah and kedusha to our lives as Jews. Any clarifications, questions, complaints, critiques? Let me see what the chat says.
Rabbi Dennis, may I ask a question?
Sure.
So I am not very familiar with maybe a more orthodox realm, but my memory is that there are a lot of blessings that we say through our day, or that we're maybe supposed to say through our day, about like starting our day, and like just so many that almost maybe I always thought of as like making the mundane more kind of present and being thankful for this small, maybe everyday things. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, thank you for raising that. The morning begins by reciting blessings. Upon awakening from bed, you're supposed to recite a blessing. Upon going to bed, you're supposed to recite a blessing. Baruch atah, I'm talking about. As you get up from bed, you even say a blessing in the traditional setting. You say two blessings. One, thanking God for the functioning of your body, that your body works in miraculous ways. And the other one is thanking God for the awareness that your body works, and that's what we would call the soul, or the spirit, or the personality, or the awareness of who we are. So upon awakening in the morning, we say, thanks for giving us a body that works. Sometimes it works better than other times, but it is an awareness that we are somatic, right? And the blessing, for those of you who know it, is a blessing that is recited upon performing one's bodily functions in the morning. We say thanks. Whoa. Otherwise, the day would not go as well, right? So it is a very mundane, as mundane as you can get. And then you give a prayer of thanks for the soul. Elohai neshama shenatatavi, the soul that you have imparted to me. And the word neshama in Hebrew, which usually translated as soul, means the breath, the capacity to breathe. Breath is associated with soul. It is a way in which we put out and take in the world, right? By breathing. It's a constant inhalation and exhalation of the world in our lives. And then the service continues with a series of blessings known as Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings. And they are blessings of awareness and blessings of thanksgiving and blessings that call us to do certain things. We say, blessed are you, eternal God, who causes slumber to be removed from my eyes. Okay, we're awake. What does that mean? Okay, the day has begun. We started with an awareness that we have responsibilities and sacred duties, clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, etc., etc., etc. So we begin the day with a series of both awarenesses and reminders. We give thanks that we can be aware, and we give thanks for the opportunity that this awareness of ourselves gives us to step out of ourselves. I call the morning blessings the aha experiences of Judaism. You get up in the morning, you say, aha, okay. Some people say, oi, okay? When you get out of bed, some people say, oi, other people say, aha. And then if you engage in the daily prayers, all of the liturgy is kind of constructed around the format of the blessing, the bracha. Most important prayers are coined Baruch atah Adonai, either at the beginning or at the end, giving thanks or expressing awareness. So those two forms are there. So yes, thank you, Heather. Significantly, the prayer ritual, and you can open a prayer book, and perhaps Cantor Melissa discussed this with you, and just look at the first series of blessings that are recited upon beginning a new day. Today, they're often done in the synagogue, but originally they were intended to be done at home. They're private prayer. The public prayer doesn't begin until you get to the Shema, with the Baruch Hu and the call to community. Everything said before that is considered private prayer. Then Baruch Hu leads us to Shema and the daily Amida. Those are the public units of prayer. But there is then in the Jewish tradition private, personal prayer and public institutional prayer. But yes, prayer in a way, or prayer significantly, is a reminder and an awareness of the life of mitzvah, our responsibilities. Lamakom, to God, lechavereinu, to our friends, neighbors, community, world. Okay, what else?
Rabbi Sasso, is there an explanation as to why Rabbi Hillel put his distillation of Torah in such a passive sense? That which is hateful to you, don't do to others. Seems to me you could do that living in your basement. There's no proactive goodness there. That's
a discussion that goes on a lot. that which is usually referred to as the golden rule has been formulated in many different ways by different religious traditions. That is one formulation of it. You find it in the New Testament in the words of Jesus as, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think you can make a case that either one of them is passive and active. Not to do unto others what is hurtful, in a way, I think requires more discipline than doing unto others that which you would like to be done to you. Because doing unto others as you would like done to you, in a way, has an expectation of returning the compliment, right? But not doing unto others puts a certain thoughtfulness into the process and means be careful of the ways in which your deeds, your words, your actions can impact negatively or hurtfully in others. So I think it's a conversation that can go both ways. I don't think that one is better than the other. It could be just a matter of the context in which they were issued. And we now just have the quote, right? Anything is distilled from experience. They have greater or lesser resonance in other times. They are both efforts to explain love your neighbor as yourself. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? It means that your neighbor is as important as yourself. In fact, one of the interpretations of the Hebrew in the rabbinic tradition, the Hebrew is ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. 3 words. Love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the interpretations that the rabbis give is love your neighbor who is yourself or like yourself. And what it is that you and your neighbor, what is it that unites you and your neighbor, according to the tradition, that you're both in the image of God. And the image of God is infinite. Therefore, you both are representations. There is a reluctance in the Jewish tradition to show artistic depictions of the divine, right? We do not represent God anthropomorphically. And that was one of the issues that Judaism and early Christianity differed significantly about. And the reason, say the rabbis, is because we don't need to represent God anthropomorphically, because each one of us is a representation of the divine. Every human being is the image of God. So that is one of the interpretations. But yes, thanks for raising that. I would invite you to consider, as I have said, the implications of both ways of putting it. And ideally, both are well done. Nice to see your face again, Mike, following our conversation. The Khans are new members of the congregation. Say hi. You live in Marion, Indiana, right? Good. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I invite you to read, in connection with today's session, in this book, To Life by Harold Kushner, if you have it. And if not, it's a good book to get. Chapter 3, in many ways, it fleshes out what we're talking about today, the sacred deed, making the ordinary extraordinary. And then there is this other book that I recommended, Essential Judaism, that if you don't have, is a good book to get. Chapter 4 of Essential Judaism. It's entitled 613 Ways, 613 mitzvot of living a Jewish life. And it talks about observance and rituals and the practices. Okay, let's talk about ways in which Jewish tradition has sought to sanctify the everyday. What do you do to sanctify your everyday life Jewishly? Let's talk about Jewishly now, because we can sanctify life as human beings, but let's now kind of see what Judaism offers us to walk in the path of holiness. Anybody?
Keeping kosher when you eat.
Okay. Who said that?
Death again.
Okay. Thank you. Next. Another one.
Living when entering the room to kiss the mezuzah.
Okay. Placing a mezuzah on the doorpost of your house is a reminder of the holiness inherent in this place, right? And when we put the mezuzah to the door, we say a blessing. Blessed are you, eternal God, who has sanctified us with your mitzvot and enjoined us to place the mezuzah on our doors.
Light the candles on Friday night.
Lighting candles, so that when's the Shabbat categories. Okay, the home, the Sabbath, kosher. Okay, let's see what I find very helpful what Harold Kushner does in that chapter. And he distinguishes 4 ways of bringing holiness into our lives. I don't know that we're going to get to talk about all of them today, but at least we will lift the areas and then you can explore them on your own. He suggests that we sanctify life by the act of eating. And the dietary laws are ways in which we can do that. We sanctify life by the act of eating. Mundane activity, can't do without it, but we just don't do it. We don't live to eat. We eat to live, and we try to do it in a way that is life-worthy, I guess. We'll come back to that. The other area that he suggests is that we sanctify our lives through sexuality. The gift of sexuality is a way in which we can bring holiness into our lives. And he discusses expressions of that. So sexual behavior is life-enhancing in Judaism if done in responsible ways, according to the tradition. And then the mores have changed on this over the ages, right? Like everything else. We learn not only from the Torah, but we bring the Torah to bear light on new realities that we need to address. The other way in which he proposes that we sanctify life is by taming the acquisitive instinct. What does it mean to tame the acquisitive instinct? That's another word for acquisitive, the consumptive. We need to train the consumptive instinct, our consumerism, our acquisitional tendencies. We need to tame that by acts that bring holiness to life. And how do we do that? He says through Shabbat, rest, that reminds us that all of life is not about more, more, more. And we do it through tzedakah, generosity, acts of loving kindness, that all I have is not just for me, that I have a responsibility to share what I have with others. So we bring sanctity to the acquisitive instinct, which is not a bad thing. It is good that we are moved to improve, to better ourselves, to do good for our families. But remember, it's not just get. There is an element of share and give and stop. That's Shabbat and tzedakah, which is the term that we give to charitable deeds. And then we sanctify life by the power of speech. We have to be careful how we talk, what we say, to whom, about others. Speech is a human endowment. In a way, in the Middle Ages, it was considered the way in which we are made in the divine. But speech can be used for a blessing or it can be used to destroy. So we bring sanctity to the way we speak of others. There's a whole category of speaking in the Jewish tradition that is considered defamatory, sinful, non-holy. It's called Lashon Hara, the bad tongue or the evil tongue. And that includes gossip or saying negative things about other people in public, even if they are true. It is not just spreading lies about others, but maligning others. There's a whole realm of teaching concerning proper use of language in the Jewish tradition, the ethics of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue. So, kashrut, sexuality, Shabbat and tzedakah, and speech. These are areas which we seek to tame, sanctify by means of appropriate behaviors and reminders. Let's talk a little bit about kashrut, because it's a topic that, at a practical level, many of you will encounter. Kashrut is the system of eating kosher. Kosher is something is kosher, or in Hebrew, kasher, kasher. The system of observing the dietary laws is kashrut. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. And we have some postings for that. Jackie, if you're with us, there is a sheet that says permitted foods in the Bible. And it has 2 quotes from Genesis. Can you post that?
Let me find it and I'll get it up.
Permitted foods in the Bible. Who's hungry? Here we go. Okay, the Bible talks about food at the very beginning. First chapter of the book of Genesis. After the creation of the human being, God says, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, every tree that has in its seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, and to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day. Okay, what does that tell us? What are we permitted to eat?
Everything.
Everything?
Well, until Genesis 9.
Read it carefully. No, Genesis 1 still. What are we permitted to eat?
I don't see fish on there.
All plants.
Yeah, we should be vegetarians.
That's it. The Genesis first diet to the human is vegetarian. You should eat any tree, any seed, anything. Not only you, but all the animals on the earth. You are supposed to be vegetarian. That is the ideal biblical diet, vegetarianism. Now, things begin to take a bad turn, and human beings become violent, and there is hurt and murder, and things are not going the way God had planned. And after the flood, God blesses Noah and his sons and says to them, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. The fear and the dread of you shall be, that's a very bad translation, shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky. Everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea, they are given into your hand. So in Genesis 1, God intended a universe at harmony with itself. Things don't turn out that way, and now there is a built-in disharmony in nature. And after the flood, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. As with the green grasses, I give you all these. Now you are permitted to eat meat, life stuff. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. But for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. Now, blood becomes the symbol of life. So this is the first injunction that if you eat flesh, you should not eat the blood in it. So the Bible early on says, no blood, don't eat blood. Blood is a symbol of life for humans, for animals. Don't eat blood. Hence the ritual kosher practice of deblooding or debleeding an animal before eating it. Part of the kosher ritual slaughter is to drain the blood out of the animal before it is ready for eating. So here we have two different moments. First, vegetarian. Second, okay, concession to eat meat with restrictions. That's all that we are told here. Later in the Bible, there will be a roster of the things that are eatable or edible and things that are not edible. And that catalog occurs, if you can put it up quickly, Jackie, Torah Dietary Laws, Leviticus 11. And then on the flip side of that page, it's Deuteronomy 14. Why don't you post 14, Deuteronomy 14. It's shorter and easier to look at. Twice in the Torah, we find a listing of permissible and non-permissible foods. Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14. You can read them on your own. This is the beginnings of the prescription of dietary laws in the Jewish tradition. There you go. So Deuteronomy 14. It begins with a reference of not doing certain practices that other people do. Don't gash yourselves. Don't injure your own body. And then you shall not eat anything that is abhorrent. The term is not as abhorrent in Hebrew. But, so what are the animals that you may eat? And I'll summarize for you. It categorizes animals as land animals, air animals, and sea animals, or land, sea, and air. These are the animals that you may eat. The ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild ox, the ibex, the antelope, the mountain sheep, any other animals that has true hoofs, which are cleft in two and bring up the cud, such you may eat. What is the definition of a kosher animal? Split hooves, chews its cud. Cow, antelope, gazelle, yes. Horse, no split hooves. Swine, pig, no, doesn't chew its cud. Has split hooves, but doesn't chew its cud. That is the definition of a kosher animal, mammal. Split hooves, chews its cud. It's a domesticated vegetarian animal. So you were supposed to be vegetarians to begin with. Since you can't hack it, now you can only eat animals that are vegetarian. And so it goes. See, the swine, although it has true hoofs, it does not bring up the cud. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat its flesh. So this is a very early listing. Next one, in the water, you may eat anything that has fins and scales. If it has fins and scales, you can eat it. If it doesn't have fins and scales, it is not kosher. What has fins and scales? Yeah, most of the fish that we eat. Shark? No, it has fins, but no scales. So it has to have fins and scales. Somebody name some good fish that you can eat that fit into this category?
Sea bass.
Sea bass is good. Whitefish.
Salmon.
How about, I'm sorry?
Salmon.
Salmon, tuna. Yeah, all of those good things. There's a question about swordfish. Some Jews eat swordfish. Many Orthodox Jews don't, because it goes through a period in its life where it sheds its scales. But in many in the conservative movement and many more progressive Orthodox groups, it is edible. Okay, what about the birds? The following you may not eat: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon, the buzzard, every variety of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull. What kind of animals are those? Birds of prey.
Meat eaters.
Meat, you can't eat them. They have to be, domesticated, grain-eating birds. Some Orthodox Jews won't eat turkey because they consider it to be, it might eat flesh. And besides, we didn't know about it until we came to America. So it's new. For extreme Orthodox people, the Torah prohibits anything that is new. Okay, all winged, swarming things are unclean. You may only eat clean winged creatures. You shall not eat anything that has died a natural death. If you find an animal in the field and it's dead, you may not eat it. Okay.
I thought you could eat locusts. And
Locusts you can eat, yes. If you look at Leviticus 11, the other side, it's a more comprehensive table, and it mentions locusts are edible. There's certain types of animals that insects are edible, others are not, depending on their constitution. So this was a shorter listing. That's what I wanted to bring it to your attention. You can give it to the stranger because they eat it. It's not because they are lesser than you, but other people eat it. So you can't eat it, so share it with the stranger. Doesn't mean poison them, it means they eat it. And I mean, for them, it was a matter of, we don't do this. It was not so much a medical prescription, but kind of an intuitive type of thing. So an animal that has died of natural death is called navel or nevela. You don't eat it. And then it says, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And this injunction appears 3 times in the Torah. And what do we get from this injunction? You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
We don't
mix meat and dairy.
Good. It is the basis of the separation of meat and dairy in the Jewish tradition. And it is an extrapolation, because all that this says is don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Right? It was considered inhumane. It was a practice of other peoples. We don't do that. We don't put the child to die in the life-giving element of the mother, the milk. The child's supposed to drink the milk of the mother, not to be killed by it. So it's an ethical injunction. But from there evolves a whole practice of separating meat and dairy in the Jewish tradition. And in time, it's applied even to fowl. So traditional dietary laws don't permit you to eat fowl with dairy, but you can eat fish with dairy, but not fowl.
Wasn't chicken parve for quite a while? And then it looked too much like meat, so they changed it, kind of.
There have been different traditions as kashrut has evolved, and different communities have different standards as well. Yes. The question is, what about eggs? Since eggs come from a chicken, are they considered dairy or meat? Neither. They are considered in the category of parve, P-A-R-V-E, parve or parve. Anything that is neither meat nor dairy is called parve, and that applies to fruits, vegetables, eggs. You can eat them with either. Now, go back to the meat and milk separation. That practice evolves over time. And there are different practices, even among Orthodox Jews, about how long you have to wait between one and the other. Some Orthodox Jews wait 6 hours between meat and milk. Some wait 3 hours. Spanish Portuguese Orthodox Jews wait 72 minutes. See? Now you can eat meat after dairy, but you do a symbolic transition or separation. Some people will wait half an hour. Technically, you can serve dairy appetizers and have a meat meal. But then if you're strict about your observance, you have to put away all the dishes to start again. So there are all those practices. So the practice of observing dietary laws goes back to the Torah, but it unfolds and evolves and is interpreted significantly, and it changes in the Jewish tradition. What is the term that comes to mind when I say something is not kosher? What would you call an unkosher meat? Can't hear you. I saw your mouth move in the right way, Lori.
Treif.
Treif. What is treif? Let's go back to screen. Full screen. What is treif? Ever heard that expression?
Non-kosher.
There's something.
If I serve you, don't say that I served you, but if I were to serve you a hamburger with a few layers of cheese and some bacon on top of that, and would you call that kosher, or would you call it treif?
Can I call it delicious?
You can, but it's not kosher.
I'll take your word for it. But it is not treif. Here is the meaning of the word treif. Treif is an animal that has suffered a violent death. An animal that has been slaughtered inappropriate is treif, even if the animal is a kosher animal. The Torah earlier tell you should not eat anything that you find dead in the field. That's navel. Treif is a hunted animal, is treif. If you shoot an animal, if you shoot it with an arrow, if you shoot it with a gun, even though it's a beautiful deer or a gazelle or a cow that you may eat because its meat would be kosher, by the violent death that it incurred, it is now treif. If an animal is eaten by other animals, you find a deer torn in the field by the tiger or the fox or whatever, that is now treif. The word treif comes from the Hebrew taref, which means torn apart or violently slaughtered. So it's not just the animal that has to qualify as being kosher, it is the slaughtering process that affirms that it is kosher. A violent killing of an animal renders it unkosher.
So if there's roadkill on the road, it's treif and unkosher because it's been killed violently and it's already dead when you find it.
That's
so
right.
You can't have roadkill.
It's navel and treif.
Okay.
Even though the deer would have been a kosher meat if you appropriately slaughtered it and prepared it. Okay, so I say that because a lot of people use the word treif kind of saying, not kosher, but the word treif technically means something that has suffered a violent death. And let's finish with the vocabulary of dietary laws that we have. It's called How Jews Eat. Can you post that, Jackie, and we'll do a 2-minute on this? Is that among the sheets?
Give me a sec.
Found it? Just want to. Okay, I'm sorry we didn't get to examine all the other aspects of sanctifying life, but I invite you to read the chapter 3 in To Life, and we can always pick up this conversation as we move along, because next week we're going to be talking about life cycle and some of these things. We'll figure. Well, here's a vocabulary of dietary laws. Kashrut is the name for the system of observance of the dietary laws. Kasher or kosher denotes something that is okay. The word simply means all right, okay. And it doesn't apply to food only. You can say a Torah scroll is kosher. I mean, it fits the ritual qualifications. So to be kosher is okay to eat, but it can apply to other things as well. Taref or treif, we already learned, something that has been killed violently, hence not kosher. Milchig or chalav, milchig is the Yiddish term for milk, chalav, the Hebrew term for dairy. Milchig or chalav refers to dairy foods. Fleischig or basar refers to meat or flesh. Parv or parve is something that is neither dairy nor meat. Fruits, eggs, vegetables, you can eat them with either meat or milk. There is no separation. A shochet is a ritual slaughterer. That is a person who slaughters animals according to the Jewish practice of shechita, of kosher slaughtering. Tsa'ar ba'alei cha'im, that's an important term, and it figures into the conversation on dietary laws. There is a concept in Jewish ethics, tsa'ar ba'alei cha'im, the pain of living creatures. And this goes back, Tori, I think it was you who talked about the insect in your house. Tsa'ar ba'alei cha'im means that we need to be sensitive to the pain of living creatures. All living creatures need to be treated with respect. And if you are a Jewish farmer or you have a pet at home, you must first see to it that your pet and your animals are fed before you feed yourself. And you cannot inflict pain on them. Some of the dietary laws revolve around an ancient practice that is prohibited by Judaism, and it's considered inhumane, and that was common in ancient times, and unfortunately you may still find from time to time. And eating a limb of a living animal in times of before refrigeration or whatever, you would amputate a limb of an animal and eat it without killing the animal. So this is considered tsa'ar ba'alei cha'im, the pain of living creatures, that would be totally morally unacceptable in Judaism or as a humane practice. Then I just introduced Pesach, which is Passover, because Passover has a lot of its own dietary practices. Food that is appropriate for Passover is kosher lePesach or kasher lePesach. Chametz is the general category for bakeries or bread that is not kosher for Passover. Chametz, because it has leavening, and we're supposed to eliminate our chametz during the week of Pesach. It also means anything that is puffy. So you should eliminate your own puffiness during Passover as well. And matzah is the name that we give to the bread that we eat on Passover. It means pressed down bread. It is the bread of the pressed down bread of the afflicted. And we eat it in remembrance of the fact that we were slaves. So that's a little bit of the vocabulary of the dietary laws. It's much more complex than that. I just wanted you to be aware of it as you learn about it and decide what is an appropriate standard for you. Kashrut, like anything else, is not an all or nothing. You may find some things that are more appropriate for you, and there are many observant Jews today that make this that have distinctions on Passover. Some people are going back to, if you go back to a vegetarian diet, you're essentially observing kosher because you're just eating vegetables, and then pretty much anything in that field is appropriate. Some people will permit themselves certain things outside that they will not eat in the home. Some people will eat animals that are kosher, even though they may not have been slaughtered in a kosher way. So that, what I'm presenting to you is the entire menu, the broad spectrum of the dietary laws, and I invite you to learn more about them and to decide what and if speaks to you. And Tony appropriately notes that kashrut is best done in small steps if you are considering entering into it, because you make your way into it like anything else. But I just wanted to present before you just the beginning, the foretaste of what Judaism calls the dietary laws. It is a vast field, and read about it if you have any questions. Ever been to a supermarket and tried to look for kosher food? Well, there's a whole industry, and kosher foods are usually designated so by different symbols. Sometimes an O with a U inside of it, and that means Orthodox Union of Rabbis has okayed that. Sometimes it has a K. Sometimes it has the letter D next to it, which means this is kosher but dairy. Sometimes it has a K and a P, which means this is kosher and parv, and so forth. So that is the quick.
P means for Passover, Dennis. P
Yes.
is for Passover, not for parv. If it's parv, it usually says parv. I'm sorry to correct you.
Or P.
I've not seen that as itself. It almost always refers to Passover stuff.
Yes, during Passover. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go
No
ahead.
problem. You might be right. So the P could stand for parv or say kosher for Pesach. The D for dairy, and otherwise it is a meat product. Tony is an expert in dietary law, so if you have any questions, you can ask her. Okay, we did not get to the other forms of sanctifying life. Read about it, think about it, and if you want to raise any questions next week, we can do that. Thank you. It's 11:30. Any last minute questions? Thanks to the new participants in the program today, Sarah and Joey. Welcome to the group. Anybody else new started for the first time today? Yep. Okay, we'll see you next week. We're going to talk about, I believe, the life cycle, right? Yes, Jewish timetable. No, the calendar, seasons and festivals of the Jewish calendar. Then you will do Rhythms of Our Lives, the life cycle with Rabbi Jenny. Okay, don't forget to send me a note if your interest is in pursuing conversion, and then we will try to assemble us for conversation at a future time. Have a good day, and it's windy outside, so be careful.